and welcome to Uncle Matt Online Academy. In today's lesson, we want to look at food chain. So we are going to learn the meaning of food chain, and we learn examples of food chain and advantages of food chain. Food chain talks about the connection that organisms have for distributing energy or food. Of course, you know that energy comes from eating food. There is a relationship or connection between organisms that helps these organisms to transfer energy from one organism to another organism. When this occurs in a straight sequence, we call it a food chain. We know that human beings, there are certain plants we cannot eat, but there are some organisms that can eat that plant and get energy from that plant, and another organism will eat that organism, another one will eat it, and it continues like that until it gets to human beings. So indirectly, we are now eating the organism that is eating the dangerous plant. The essence of eating is to get energy, but that plant that contains energy, that energy we want to eat, it may contain another dangerous chemical that is not good for us. So if we eat it directly, we'll take the energy, but we'll take another chemical that will affect us. So when another organism eats it, the chemical may not affect the organism. So the organism will eat it and still live. Another organism will eat it and then it will get to us. So we collect the energy without actually taking that dangerous chemical. So that is an advantage of having a food chain. Um, this is one of the reasons for the existence of a food chain, why nature created something like that. So food chain shows the connection between organisms and the way they eat in a straight sequence. If it is not in a straight sequence, we have another name for it, and that is going to be in another lesson. For today, we are discussing food chain, a food relationship or eating relationship that exists in a straight path or straight sequence. This shows how energy is moved from one organism to another organism. Of course, we know that sun is the primary source of energy on Earth. All the energy that we have, the energy in human beings, the energy in anything, everything comes from the sun. It's sun that gives energy to the Earth, and then plants, which is the producer, we attract the energy, and then organisms will eat the plants as consumers, and the energy will keep circulating that way. We need the energy to do work. We need energy to do so many things. In order to obtain this energy that we need for doing work, we have to eat other organisms in order to get this energy. So nature has made this pathway for us to get energy from other organisms, and that is what we call the food chain. If you are asked to define food chain, you can simply say that a food chain is a straight connection or sequence that shows how energy moves from one organism to another, or a straight sequence that shows the feeding relationship between organisms. A straight sequence that shows feeding relationship, a straight sequence, a straight sequence that shows sequence that shows the feeding relationship, the feeding the feeding relationship feeding relationship between or among organisms. among organisms. Among organisms. So we can define food food chain this way. Sequence food food relationship among organisms. So we can also define it this way, that it is either a straight connection or sequence that shows how energy moves from one organism to another, or a straight sequence that shows the feeding relationship among organisms. Now, example, this food chain, it can involve only two organisms. It can involve more than two organisms. For instance, in this example one, when we buy vegetable in the market to use and cook our food, when we eat it, is a food chain. Energy from the vegetable has moved to our body. So, but we have only two organisms or two things involved in this one, vegetable and man. It can be more than two, which involves the producer, the consumer, and other consumers. So like this example two, where we have grass to grasshopper, and from grasshopper to rats. So the energy is moving from the producer, which is the rat, which is the grass, to grasshopper, and from grasshopper to rat. Now what we see here is this. We can notice that the food chain, we can have different producers involved in the chain. I mean, different consumers involved in the chain. Here, normally, we always have one producer in the food chain, and there may be one or many consumers and the composers involved in the food chain. In the first example, we have just one producer and one consumer. In the second example, we have one producer and two consumers. So energy is moving from the grass to the grasshopper to the rat. This food chain occurs in every ecosystem, whether it is in land ecosystem or water ecosystem. We find food chain. The organisms living there, they have to feed, they have to relate to each other to eat. In the sea or in the aquatic ecosystem, we see seaweed, weed that is growing inside ocean. Fish will eat it, certain fish will eat the seaweed, and when we catch the fish, our rat may take the fish we caught and eat it, and maybe man will catch the rat and eat the rat. So the energy is moving from seaweed inside the sea and to man. So we see another indirect way that the energy from something that we cannot eat directly can get to us. Inside the sea, not every person can swim and not everybody can catch fish, but the fish will now eat the seaweed. The person that can swim very well will catch the fish, and by mistake, rat will eat his fish, and then man will catch the rat and eat the rat, and the energy is circulating that way. So that is what we call food chain. You can see that this happen in a straight chain. This one eats, everything has only one source of food in a food chain. This is a very important point you have to note about it. Every organism has just one source of food in food chain. Here, man eats leaf direct. There is no other branch. You know that normally man eats vegetable, eats meat, and eats other things. But in food chain, we are just considering only one thing. Here, grasshopper, grass is eaten by grasshopper, and grasshopper is being eaten by rats. Only one source of food in food chain. Now, please note that the sun is the primary source of energy, like I've said before. And as we're moving from one level to another level, the energy is decreasing. So the sun has the greatest amount of energy, followed by the producer, which is the plant. The plant, that is why we have so many plants, because there are so many energy available for them. Then it now reduces to the consumers, and for consumers it gets to the composers. So the composers, they have the least amount of energy. Now we also notice that the organisms reduces organisms reduce in number as we move from one food chain level to another. That is why we have more plants than animals, because animals are consumers, and producers, which are plants, they have more energy than consumers. So as you are moving from that, and even as within the consumers, as they are depending on each other, the energy is also reducing. Organisms that cannot eat directly from plants, they are lower in number, like lion that depend only on animals. They cannot eat from plants. So you find out that lions, they are very, very few in number compared to other organisms that can eat from plants directly. So this food chain determines the number of organisms that will be available in an ecosystem. Now, the advantage of a food chain is that number one is that it helps food or energy to reach all the organisms in the ecosystem. And number two is that it helps to recycle energy. In the first example, that it helps energy to reach all the organisms in an ecosystem. Take for instance the plant that we cannot eat but it contains energy. Now by through the food chain, another organism can eat it and get the energy, and indirectly we eat that organism, and so the energy gets to us. Now energy is also recycled from the producer, maybe the grass or vegetable. Human being will eat vegetable, and eventually human being will die, and when we die we decompose, and another plant will grow from us, using our body as our decaying body as a nutrient, and then the energy keeps circulating that way. So it helps to circulate the energy, and it also helps to recycle the energy. So that these are the advantages of a food chain, and I hope that this is very clear. Thank you.